give us a reading from each of their respective books, and then to jump into Q&A with them. Just to give a quick intro, I know you've all probably seen their bios, but we also wanted to make sure that just in case you were new here and you hadn't seen and heard about the amazing accomplishments and inspiring things that they've both done, that we made sure to share it with you. So starting with Jackson. Jackson is an internet creator and LGBTQ+ advocate dedicated to demystifying the transgender experience. His work has appeared in the New York Times, Vulture, The Advocate, and way more. And his TED Talk, How to Talk and Listen to Transgender People, has been viewed over 1.5 million times. He's a GLAAD Rising Star digital innovator and lives in New York City, and he's going to read from his memoir, Sorted. Dane is a personal trainer. Dane Woodland is a personal trainer, public speaker, activist, Lululemon ambassador, and all-around incredible human, who was a 2016 TEDxYouth St. John speaker and co-author of transVersing, which he'll be reading from tonight. He was shortlisted as a nominee for the Newfoundland and Labrador Human Rights Award in 2018, and he's a MerB'y. Did I read that right? Is that how you pronounce that?
MerB'y.
MerB'y, and was featured in the 2019 calendar, where they raised over $200,000 for the Violence Prevention Newfoundland organization. And tonight he's going to read an excerpt from transVersing. So thank you so much to all of you for joining us, but especially to Dane and Jackson. And we would encourage all of you, while each of them are reading their excerpts from their books, to put your questions in the chat. You know, we want to make this as interactive and conversational as possible. And so we encourage you to use the chat and to obviously be super thoughtful in your questions, but you know, we do want to make sure that there's an open floor here too. So, you know, we'll start in alphabetical order. Jackson, we'll have you read first, but do you want to tell us a little bit of, when I said alphabetical, I meant by last name, sorry.
Yep.
So, do you want to tell us a little bit about Sorted and why you decided to write a memoir?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, I mean, thank you so much for having me, and thank you all for being here. I've only done a couple of virtual calls where everyone's in the Zoom call together, and it's so much better because I feel like you're at an actual event where you can like see people. But anyways, yeah, so Sorted is my memoir that came out last year. The paperback's actually coming out next week, so like we're right around a full year that it's been out. It's called Sorted: Growing Up, Coming Out, and Finding My Place, which is a subtitle that I never remembered the name of on the original press tour. But it is, yeah, I mean, exactly what it says on the tin. I, about 5 years ago, came out as transgender publicly. I had a little bit of a public presence online and was the spokesperson for a nonprofit. So it was a fairly 21st century public kind of coming out and transitioning process. And I decided to write it because I had written a zine sort of just about my transition a little bit, that was for donors to my top surgery. I was able to like raise a bunch of money, but still needed to kind of close the gap. So I ended up getting talked into doing a crowdfunder, and I felt so guilty about that. I was like, I must give people something. So I decided to write the zine. And for any of you who are from the zine culture, you know, they're usually like, you know, 5 pages, 10 pages. They're not very long. And I accidentally wrote 75 pages. And as I was doing that, was kind of like, you know, maybe there's something to this. Like, I think I might have a lot that I need to get out. And I also, once the zine was out there, I got a really good reception from people, trans and cis alike, just sort of saying how it resonated with them or it taught them a lot. And so I sort of felt like I wanted to do more justice to the project and kind of finish it and expand it. And I was very lucky enough to be able to do that with the help of Simon & Schuster. So yeah, that's sort of, I guess, a bit of the background on Sorted and me.
That's amazing.
Are we, yeah, should I get into it?
Yeah, absolutely. So
Okay.
I think you're going to read an excerpt from your chapter, Getting Jacked.
Do you have the
right?
paperback?
Oh, of course I have the book.
I don't have it yet. I think they're lost in the mail. Oh my gosh, this is my first time seeing it.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah.
I'm going to get you to sign this at some point. So, you know,
we'll bike to each other in the city. Yeah, I was about to say, I'm going to read off of a PDF. So apologies for all the glasses glare and stuff. Because I wanted to read my updated like edits from the paperback, but I don't have a copy yet. I should have borrowed Sherry's ahead of time. So the selection I'm reading is later on in the memoir, and it's right after I had just gotten my first injection of testosterone. And I wanted to read this selection because I knew that, you know, we're talking about gender, we're talking about kind of masculinity with next gen men being here. And so I had written a little bit about my thoughts, which are totally biased, about sort of testosterone and masculinity. So yeah, I thought I would read a little selection here. I think the only background you need to know is that I might mention the HPA, which is the Harry Potter Alliance. It's a nonprofit organization that I used to be the communications director and spokesperson for. So at the time of this passage, that was my role there. So, all right, let me take a sip of water before we dive in. When I left the doctor's office with an extra 0.25 ml of testosterone cypionate simmering inside of me and walked to meet friends for celebratory drinks at a nearby bar, I tried to sense if anything felt different yet. It takes a few weeks on testosterone for any visible changes to occur, and up to several years for some more noticeable effects like thick, substantial facial hair and body fat redistribution. It's not an instantaneous transformation like the serum that turned Captain America into a super soldier. But you might notice a few new sensations in the hours and days following your first shot. It's not uncommon for your throat to feel sore almost immediately as your vocal cords begin to thicken, or to feel hungrier and have more energy in the first few days. I, like many other people, felt more clear-headed. Everything, my mind, my body, my perception of the world just felt more balanced. How much of this is really happening and how much of it is a placebo effect is difficult to tell. You know, apart from the obvious changes like your deeper voice and increased muscle mass, there's a lot about changes from testosterone that remains up for debate. One example is the stereotype that taking testosterone as part of hormone replacement therapy makes people more prone to anger. Though the WPATH standards of care note aggression as a possible side effect, studies performed on trans men taking testosterone disagree on whether this is actually the case. Thomas Page McBee investigated the relationship between testosterone and violence in his treatise on masculinity, Amateur, A Reckoning with Gender, Identity, and Masculinity. McBee talked to neuroscientist Robert Sapolsky, who admits that higher levels of testosterone correlate with aggression in many instances, but that those correlations don't tell the whole story. One has to take into account behavioral and environmental factors as well. Sapolsky has not studied the effects of hormone replacement therapy specifically, but his more general research on testosterone suggests that testosterone doesn't cause aggression, though it might exaggerate what is already there. So as one example, people with patterns of aggressive behavior in the past could potentially see an uptick when their testosterone levels are increased. Sapolsky notes in his essay, The Trouble with Testosterone, however, that changes within a normal range of testosterone, which those taking hormone replacement therapy as prescribed and monitored by a medical professional are within, wouldn't actually alter aggressive behavior. You'd have to be pumping testosterone up to an extreme range to observe changes in aggression, he says. But since none of the above research has included hormone replacement therapy and its effects on transgender individuals, it's difficult to parse out what precisely this means for those individuals in general, and especially what it means for them at the start of hormone replacement therapy when their bodies are being introduced to new amounts of testosterone all at once. Do some individuals see a spike in aggression from the initial change, but mellow out once their bodies become accustomed to a new normal within that range? A lot of anecdotal evidence would point to yes. But with a shortage of formal studies and individuals disagreeing on their own experiences, much still remains up for debate. Sapolsky did offer some sage wisdom in his conversation with McBee that I personally tend to think is the more important perspective to focus on for now. He says, if our world is riddled with male violence, the core problem isn't that testosterone can often increase levels of aggression. The problem is the frequency with which we reward aggression. I didn't notice myself being more aggressive in the months following that first and subsequent injections. If anything, I was less hot-headed than I had been when I was in the closet and often at my wit's end with dysphoria. I did notice, however, that I was being more assertive. I was speaking up for more for what I wanted, something I had always struggled with in the past. But I have trouble believing that was caused solely by new amounts of a specific androgen in my body and not also due to some of the social and emotional changes in my life that happened at the same time. I had gained quite a bit of confidence after working through so many of my thorniest issues and was better able to recognize the importance of advocating for my needs than I had been before therapy. There's also the sad fact that people respect your opinion more when you're treated as a man by society. Even if I didn't get read as male all the time, just knowing I was a man made people listen to me more than when they had in the exact same situations when I had been presenting as a woman. Whereas we had long ago had to take my phone number off of my HPA business cards because men kept thinking I was flirtatiously giving them my number when I handed them my card at networking events. Post coming out, those same types of encounters generated a barrage of job offers. So maybe testosterone can make some people more assertive or a little bit quicker to anger, but I tend to think it has just as much, if not more, to do with the other upheavals usually happening in your life at the same time and the ways that people interact with you differently as a man. But before those changes had occurred, when I was still riding the high of my first testosterone shot, I had to make the decision of whether I was still going to move forward with fully coming out. Starting testosterone had been the final test to verify this was the right path, and my hunch had been correct. Like other trans people had said before me, as soon as I got the shot, I knew this was what was always meant to be. The problem was that I still had several weeks before I could post the video that would tell everyone else in my life who I was. I couldn't just film and upload the video whenever I wanted to because I had told people in my professional life when it would be going up, when the day would come to switch over my name on public-facing documents at the HPA and start using my Jackson email address with partners. I'd already come out to my coworkers and our entire volunteer staff over the course of the preceding months, and they were all perfectly accepting and happy for me. I wasn't surprised in the least because the HPA had been working on issues of LGBTQ+ equality since they opened their doors in 2005. During the 2012 general election, their members even broke phone banking records in 2 states where marriage equality went on to pass in November. I always said that if there had been a way just to tell my Harry Potter fandom family, my YouTube followers, and no one else, I would have done so. I never had any doubt that they would be supportive. My problem was that, apart from people I knew personally, like my coworkers at the HPA, telling the online fan community and my followers meant posting something publicly online. Even if I only had a small regular following, when something is on the internet, it's forever. Anyone can find it. Cousins, elementary school teachers, former coworkers. In order to tell my YouTube followers, I had to be prepared for everyone I had ever met to potentially find out. I think I'll go ahead and cut it off there for now.
Thanks.
Oh, thank you.
It's so fun to get an author reading, especially in these weird times where we can't do things like that normally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I will turn it over to you, Veronica. I think you're going to introduce the next excerpt reading.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks, Jackson. I haven't gotten to that part in the book yet. So now I've had like
Oh, sorry for the spoilers.
No.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, no, it's all good. But I am excited to read the rest of the book. So, so thank you. And yeah, Dane, tell us about transversing because it's a little bit different. It's not a memoir. It's a little bit different. When I started it, I was like, wait, what? Because I didn't know the background, but now I'm like, oh, this makes sense. And I love it. It's great. So yeah, tell us about transversing and yeah.
Yeah. So transversing is this really kind of unique project that started, I think the call for submissions was the end of 2016. And so basically a local person who is involved in an organization called For the Love of Learning, it's not for profit, wanted to create an opportunity for folks to submit kind of like monologues. So initially it was kind of meant to be like a spin-off of the vagina monologues, but more of like a trans monologues kind of thing. So folks who identify as trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming were given the opportunity to submit. And at first, I honestly didn't want to do anything. It's kind of funny how Jackson talked about like writing a little and then it just like kind of erupted. I feel like that's very similar for me. I like scrounged up one piece because the person involved in this organization was like, we will pay you if you write something. And I was like, oh, okay. So, but then I actually moved beyond this monetary motivation and found that I had things to say. So it came together with several people submitting their ideas. And then it was dreamt up into this production that we actually came to perform. And so we started performing transversing in collaboration with a local group known as the Trans Needs Coalition. And basically what we would do is pair this like Trans 101 education session with transversing. And so we had got a deal with the Canadian Department of Heritage and as well as some local institutions here, and going into like the university with nursing, pharmacy, and the medicine school. So these faculties were wanting to have people come in and so that they could know a little bit more about trans experience. So transversing is like this very candid look at this mosaic of lived experiences that all kind of follow this general rise and fall through everybody's different lenses. And it has become this really powerful educational tool. So the publication itself it's divided into two halves. One half is the transcript of the play, so that if a queer theatrical company wanted to perform this, there's the opportunity to do it. And then, so you can also, and of course the reader as well, you can see it for how it was arranged. But then the first half of the book is all of the pieces as they're standalone. So they all kind of are individual things that have been spliced and chopped up in a different format for the production. So yeah, that's what transversing is all about.
I love it. Yeah, when I was reading the play section of it, I was like, ooh, I got chills, and I thought how amazing it would be if I could see it live. So hopefully someone in my city will take it up and actually like perform it too. I love that. Do you want to read your excerpt that you've chosen?
Yes, I do. So I have two poems that I'd like to read. One of which is in the hard copy, the paperback, and the other that I wrote after the publication was developed, but was in like the iteration of transversing that we performed, because we performed in several different kind of like cycles, I guess, or tours, whatever you want to call it. So I've got two. So I'm going to start with the one that's in the book. And it's really interesting, actually, that Jackson started with this discussion of physical change, because I think to give some context to my experience and even reading it now and seeing like where I came from with my writing, I'm a personal trainer, as you've heard from my bio, and I live in this like toxically masculine subculture. Like for me, my transition has been so deeply shaped by my idea of what a man looks like and behaves like comes from the fact that I spend like 8 to 10 hours a day in a gym. So I see like really intense masculinity, and as a means of having to survive and trying to feel safe, it was like the only thing I could do was to kind of just jump in on that. And, you know, if you can't beat them, join them. And so it's really amazing how that experience has really informed me, and how I've had to inform my beliefs on things, and how I've also had to work through that. And almost have to peel myself away from that and find sustainability in my masculinity without it hinging on like how much I can deadlift or how jacked I look. So that's been an experience. So I want to share with you Fascination, which I wrote for the first iteration of transversing, and that's a poem that's in our book. So I'm going to whip out my copy and go through that. So this is Fascination. What is this fascination with the bodies of people who are trans? You look at us like we are car crashes or train wrecks, wanting to look away, but maintaining a steady gaze. You erase the essence of what makes us human, separating our bodies from our souls, separating our parts from our bodies. When I hear, what an amazing transformation, I can't help but wonder if you give the same notice to the changes every body undergoes. The more we experience, the more we grow. You may think that we change differently than you, but do you know anyone who has changed in the same way as you? When I read, top 10 guys you won't believe were born female, I can't help but wonder if you are celebrating or gawking and snickering as you sheepishly consider that you may find someone like me attractive, but could never imagine touching them, knowing them, or loving them. When I think trans folks are making progress, I am sobered by the thought that we are mostly visible because of our bodies, seen because we don't look trans, or because we do. And while this is all hurtful as hell, we fall in line and play with the hand that we've been dealt, in hopes that our words will not just be heard, but felt. Are you listening now? Yeah, thank you. Okay. Number 2, folks. This is my first Zoom poetry reading. So thanks for being along for the ride. So number 2 that I'm sharing with you this evening, I wrote in 2018. So Fascination was like early 2017. This is the 2018. So a little bit more growth in my life, but still the same feels. This is called The Other Boys. I am building a figure divine with contours and lines that distract from my design until I catch a glimpse that catches me off guard, and I'm not ready to guard against my fears. But with this figure, I can pretend I am a boy who can blend, so the other boys I befriend, and to survive, I bend. I polish my frame, a hard exterior is my aim. It is the vessel in which I exist as the same as one of the other boys. But during my turn of would you rather, I would rather not choose between entering an anus or an amputated arm socket. In fact, I would rather not play at all. I always think all the other boys in the change room are bigger than me, even though they're not. I sheepishly take refuge and change my shorts in the bathroom stall. And when I pee, I pretend I'm taking my 12th shit of the day because all the other boys don't fit to pee, only me. I always wipe away my labia-shaped sweat stain so that my private impression doesn't lead to an inconvenient confession. But they're not even looking, those other boys, or at least not like I think. Yet I glare and huff as I pass, just to make sure they know I'm tough, just to make sure I feel like I am enough. This figure divine, it is all mine, carefully crafted, but often impacted by the secrets that run skin deep. It is a vessel in which a soul bewitched exists as one of the other boys. That's it for me.
Oh, Dane, thank you. I love that you chose the poetry, and I love that we got to hear something that's not in the book. Thank you.
Exclusive.
I know. I was like, should I be trying to write this down? Like, how am I gonna get
I know, like, can we read that anywhere? Is it published anywhere online?
I'm gonna have to get a blog page or something, put it up.
Yeah,
I can do
because
that.
a lot of that spoke to me. I was like, I need to sit with this more and like read it again.
Dane, that's amazing. If you want to throw it up on Next Gen Men's blog, just saying, we're always here. You can if you want. It's up to you. Yeah, Anti-Sexist Social Club has their own blog too. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Sherry. That's amazing, though, Dane. Thank you so much. Sherry, I think this is over to you.
Yeah, so we would love for all of you to put your questions in the chat. Please feel free to be open. You know, if you want to just send them to me or Veronica or Bailey, you're welcome to send it to one person if you would rather not have it go to the whole group before the question getting read. But, you know, we're a pretty open community and it's a pretty intimate group, so we would encourage you to share your questions. We'll kick it off with some questions of our own, and I'll start with Jackson. So you mentioned, you know, in one of your YouTube videos, because outside of being an author and an activist, you are also a prolific YouTuber and YouTube content creator with a world famous show called Will It Waffle, among others. And one time you mentioned that writing the book was a sort of healing process for you. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, I think it was healing in sort of two different ways. There's the kind of like gender and identity side of things, but then also kind of the media side of things. And on the media side, I think, you know, as you said, prolific YouTuber, which just means I've put out a lot of videos. It doesn't necessarily mean they're like good or anything. So I've put out tons. I've been putting videos on YouTube since, like, in some ways since 2006. And also managed social media for a bunch of brands over the years. And so a lot of my output for years was fast, constant content creation, and just having to put something out there, and like almost everything is a first draft and you don't have time to like think about it and consider and sit with it. It just goes out there because you have to put something out there. And so getting to write, which I think I first felt with the zine and then even more so with the book, was like, oh my gosh, slow media is amazing. I can take my time, I can dig deeper, I can get a little bit more like, you know, emotional and reflect on how I'm feeling about things. And so I think that was honestly a big part of what it was just being someone who has been in the new media world for so long, getting to go to traditional media and be like, ah, yes, this is why we love traditional media so much and why it still has so many good merits to it. But, you know, I think also on the gender side of things, like trans people will talk a lot about how, I know one guy will often say like, oh, trans people are all self-actualized. You know, like we have to do a lot of digging deep into ourselves to kind of figure ourselves out in a way that I think some people wouldn't necessarily have to. And I do agree with that, but I also think that it's still very possible to do some of that digging and figure out who you are and what you're going to do about it without going too deep. And I think I'm someone who at least was very guilty of that. I mean, like I went deep in like anxiety spirals and depression for many, many years. But I don't know how much time I actually spent thinking about like me as a human and my relationship with the world. And I feel like when I started writing and reflecting so much on my past, that was when I sort of got an opportunity to do that in a larger way. And so I guess that's kind of the healing that I was talking about there. Yeah, and I know not everyone is a writer, but I seriously just always recommend like writing and at least some form of reflection to people. Like in this time that we're living in, I've recommended journaling to so many friends, and they've found that it really does actually help, even if they'd never journaled before, because there's just so much happening in our minds and we keep going from thing to thing. If you can just take a few minutes and step back and like just spit out stream of consciousness. It doesn't have to be something pretty. It doesn't have to be something someone will read. Just like whatever words are going through your brain. And I at least have found that it really helps.
It's amazing and beautiful. Thanks for sharing. So glad that you put your thoughts into the slow media of this book, because it's really incredible to read. Cannot recommend it highly enough. So one of the other things you talk about in your book is around being a role model. And it really struck me when I read that, because, you know, you didn't have to take that on. Like that wasn't something that was asked of you necessarily. You were obviously going through enough on your own, and you decided to take on this level of responsibility in being a role model for others, and being very deliberate about what you shared and how you shared it, and, you know, educating others on the transgender experience and all of that. What made you go down that path of the other paths that you could have taken? And generally, like, how has that experience been for you?
In hindsight, I feel like I did have more of an option than I thought, but at the time I didn't feel like I really had an option. My professional life and my personal hobby pursuit of YouTube were both so public facing that I felt like I didn't have a choice. My choice would be do this publicly, or, you know, quit working for the Harry Potter Alliance, so find a new job, quit posting on social media, give up this like YouTube channel I've been growing for years and was very passionate about. I would have to quit all of it. Because when you are trans and you are seeking to physically transition, and even if you're just socially transitioning, like people see that change. It's not like coming out about your sexuality, which can be really tough and like really, really emotionally tough to hide, and you might not want to, but with like being trans, in many ways, you literally can't. So in that way, I felt that I didn't have an option but to do it publicly. And I probably could have dialed it back. I probably could have not done it quite as publicly as I did. And sort of taken on that mantle of role model. But the thing that made me okay about doing it publicly was thinking about how little representation I had. I mean, I had zero representation until I was like in college and social media started taking off and trans people could tell their own stories. But before that, I had none. And so I just thought about like, if I was privileged enough to have this little bit of a platform, and if I didn't use that for good, if I didn't use that to help add to the representation that was so badly needed, then, you know, I would feel a little bit guilty about that. But that was sort of what made me feel okay about doing it. And yes, it has definitely been good. Do I have days where I daydream about having done it all stealth and like living on a farm upstate? Absolutely, 100%. But I am like, the experiences that I've gotten to have, the people I've gotten to meet, the stories I've gotten to hear have absolutely made it all worth it. So yeah.
I will tell you, the living on a farm upstate thing is not unique. I've had quite a bit.
I told you, I went there like, you know, last weekend. It was amazing.
Yeah.
I want to move.
Totally. Veronica, I want to make sure that we have enough time for Q&A, so I'm going to kick it over to you for some Q&A with Dane.
Sounds good. Yeah, Dane, I wanted to ask questions about poetry, and then I was like, I always feel like poetry is so deep, I can't even begin to peel back all of the things. So I asked questions regarding the other things that you wrote, because I also thought they were really wonderful. So something that came up more than once in your writing was about the golden rule. So treating others as you wish to be treated. And your realization about it was that, okay, this relies on assumptions about how others want to be treated. So it doesn't really work very well. So I'm curious about, like, what was the biggest change that you saw in your interactions and relationships with others when you kind of moved away from that golden rule and were kind of like, no, this isn't what I want to do?
Yeah, so that was a very powerful learning that I must credit to Kim Katrin, who came to speak at our campus bar, the Breezeway, at Memorial University, and I had the pleasure of hearing her. And she had actually positioned this golden rule thing. So I'll say, like, I grew up in a really religious household, and the golden rule was like this great piece of advice, you know, like, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Like, that's beautiful. Yeah, me too, Jackson. She's awesome. But yeah, it was, you know, it just seemed like such a wonderful model for how we interact with others. And when Kim was talking about it, she just flipped this narrative on its head and said, like, you know, what if you're hosting an event and you personally have the capability of ambulation, and you can, like, go upstairs, or you know, you don't need to worry about whatever. And you're like, cool, I'm going to host a party. I'm going to think about people like me attending. So I'm going to have it in a place that's upstairs. And then you have friends who have mobility aids or have difficulty, you know, navigating that type of setup, or they don't have access to the space. And, like, so in that example, doing unto someone else as you would do unto yourself is actually not helping them. So that was a really, like, concrete example that she provided that I thought was really helpful. And, like, how often do we have fights? I think about this a lot, or a conflict with others, I should say. And someone will just say, I was just trying to help, you know, and that's so, and we have the best intentions, but we're helping from our framework. And sometimes our methods of trying to help people can actually, like, make it worse, create more conflict, and, like, be a hindrance. And, you know, those efforts fall flat. So when we assume that we can meet the needs of others in the same way that we meet our own, we actually miss the opportunity to have that person feel empowered in setting guidelines for what they would need and what would be most meaningful to them. And I think about that actually a lot. Like, right now, D&I is, like, so hot. Like, everybody wants to get, like, their ally cookies. And I want to be careful about how I say this, because it is important that we are active in allyship, but we have to be mindful about how we go about it. And it can't be performative. It has to be legit. And there's this, like, mad scramble right now with people trying to be inclusive. And I think about that word, inclusive. There's a bar that just opened here, and I think it's really great, but one of their taglines is that they're inclusive. And there are ways I walked in and I know that it's not. And so even our idea of inclusion comes from this, like, framework of what we think is inclusive, what gaps we've identified. And unless we listen to what other people want and what other people need, we can't truly offer that true inclusion and that true type of support. Even in my own personal experiences, like, going to, like, pride events that are, like, catered to the 2S LGBTQ plus community, to go to a building that, oh, sorry, it had gendered bathrooms, like, that's the best we could do. Like, in a space where you are expecting to be included and to be supported, you're actually not, because, again, people are not considering other perspectives. And we have to have some compassion for that, because there's no way we're going to know somebody else's experience. The only way we can is through learning, but that's exactly why we peel back on that, as doing unto others as you would have them do unto you, because you don't even have the opportunity to listen and to learn if you just decide, well, I'd like it like this, and then you offer that to somebody else. So that has just really changed things for me. As a result, now I feel like I have this deeper richness in my relationships, in terms about, first of all, I'm more willing to be explicit about what my needs are, because I know people don't know them. And I'm also more open to hearing other people's needs and not feeling, like, disappointed or ashamed if what I offer up was not what somebody wanted. It's not something to take personal. It's just that, like, I didn't know. And, you know, and by finding out, now I know, and now I can do my best. Or I can say, hey, that's not feasible for me, but, you know, how can we compromise? What can we do? And that has also helped me to grow so much as an ally, which I think is so, so important. I am still learning, like, so much, and still trying so hard. And I know it's you know, it's a lifelong process. A lot of people are cramming for what I would call, like, the anti-racism test lately. You know, there's been a lot of reading and documentary watching in a very short period of time, and it's a commitment. It's a constant state of action. And again, we have to like, you know, modify that golden rule a little bit and dig a little bit deeper and give people their voices and listen to those voices so that we can be in solidarity as best as we possibly can be.
I love that. Yeah, it's honestly so hard sometimes to not like try to be problem solving too, right? When someone comes to you with something, and like I really had to learn that I used to work as a frontline worker. I worked with young moms and their babies in my city, and it was an amazing role, but I had to fight the urge to like, if they came to me with a problem, to be like, let's fix it, like we can do it, like immediately start spitting out like a billion different solutions. And that's not really what they are looking for most of the time, right? They just want someone to listen and be like, okay, that sounds really tough. Also, like, what do you want to do about it, right? Like, just putting that question out there, which can be really hard because it feels like you don't have the answers, right? So, but I love that. And I think you already answered I had a part 2 to that question, and I think you already answered it. So if we feel like we have time, which I feel like we have time, I would love to ask you another question. So like, I hope everyone probably saw this if they follow Next Gen Men on our social media channels, but I posted your TED Talk, Dane, because I love it. It's so great. And you talk about your changing lens on sexism through transition. And one of the things you highlighted was that the masculinity you saw, and you talked about this a little bit earlier with the gym, but the masculinity you saw in the men around you wasn't really the kind of masculinity that you wanted for yourself. So what have you come to define now as your own masculinity?
Oh, so this was a very tough question. I'm really glad that I took this time to skim your questions before this, so I would be able to like come up with something for this answer, because I feel like that definition of masculinity is so fluid for me right now. And there was a time that at first, like, if I can kind of highlight the kind of timeline of masculinity, it was like this compulsory masculinity that I had to have to fit in and to pass, so that people would be like, oh, he's a dude. Like, I know he's a dude, because I felt for some reason that maybe people would wonder if I wasn't. I don't know. I was very afraid, but I just dove right in. And then I was like, oh, this is icky. I don't like it. And then I was like, anti-toxic masculinity, which I still am, but like my lens around how I was forming my masculinity was always positioned from trying to not be like everybody else. And there was a lot of like disdain for other guys and just assumption that like all guys sucked. And that, you know, if you were a guy, this is how you're going to be, that guys didn't talk about stuff I liked, et cetera, et cetera. And so that was like also not really, I think, the right approach for me. So then, you know, I'm at the opposite end of the spectrum. I've just come to this point that like my masculinity just like really is like whatever. I don't even really know how to answer it. Like I've even thought about like my expression and my identity and just like trying to figure it all out, and how I really dove into this, like trying to show up a certain way. And my masculinity sometimes looks very traditional, and other days it doesn't look like that at all. And it just looks like what I want it to look like. And it's, yeah, I don't even know how to define it beyond that. It's just that like, I think that what I can say is that I don't feel that my masculinity is any more or less valid based on anything that I do or anything that I say or anything about me. Like, I just know that it is there and that it is mine, and it can be whatever I want it to be, and I feel secure. So maybe that's like the answer, is that like I define my masculinity as like a secure masculinity, because I know that it's mine and that it can be whatever I want it to be, and that no one can take that from me. And that's a really like peaceful, healing place to be at with it. Yeah.
I love it. I wish that for like every man on the planet, you know, getting to a point where they're happy with themselves and confident and know that they don't have to prove anything to anyone. So I love that. Thank you, Dane.
Yeah. Jackson, was there, like, I felt like maybe like you were nodding your head a couple times as Dane was talking about that. Like, was there something that you wanted to potentially add? Not to put you on the spot. Right?
I mean, mostly I super agree. And I feel like I've had the exact same trajectory. Not in a super linear way. I feel like, especially the last two kind of modules you laid there, I still kind of go back and forth between those. I feel like, yeah, I was definitely in that place for a while of like, oh, all men are terrible. And then I've just been really lucky to have some very deep friendships with cisgender men in my life, and hearing them like unprompted from me in any way talk about unpacking their own toxic masculinity and talking about unpacking their privilege was like a big eye-opening moment to be like, oh, like, okay, these discussions are happening like outside of queer circles and like outside of explicitly feminist circles. And it was really, really encouraging to hear and sort of help change my mindset and also encourage me, because I think, you know, as especially like more binary trans guys, there is absolutely like, it could be very easy to just take that privilege and run with it and, you know, treat women in ways that you got treated before and fall into all kinds of traps of toxic masculinity. One, because I think it is one of those parts of our world that unfortunately, like, you do have to actively practice and work against. But two, because there's also that element of wanting to be read as who you are in society, of wanting to fit in maybe for your own safety or for your own dysphoria. Like, there's sort of so much wrapped up into it. And I have definitely seen in a few cases of like trans men being way more misogynist than some cis men I know. Like, it's absolutely a thing. And it is a little bit, you know, there's a little, I mean, I don't think there actually is when you dig deep, but I think on the surface there can be a cognitive dissonance in being like, I did all this to be a man and now I'm going to deconstruct what it means to be a man at the same time. I mean, this is just the ways that gender is so complicated and weird. Dane, please add on if you have more.
Sorry, we didn't leave to mean you hanging. Yeah.
Yeah, that was what you just said about learning to be a man and deconstructing is very relatable, for
That's
sure.
why I loved
And
your poem when
also,
you were like the contour lines against your design. How did you say it? It was so good.
I can repeat it for you.
Yes, do it. That one really hit me. I was like, ooh, yes.
Just that first stanza. I'm building a figure design with contours and lines that distract from my design. Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. I had more questions, but I think we should probably let other people ask
We both
questions.
have more questions. We've also got some audience questions that I would like to get to. And again, like, please feel free to add your questions into the chat. So the first question for Jackson. So KFSUWI says that Will It Waffle with Pat is their favorite episode. But their question is, how did you decide what was too personal for the memoir?
Yeah. First of all, that's a deep cut for on the episode with Pat with Noodles, and Pat Graziosi is amazing. And I'm so sad he defected to California because I would love to make videos with him. We were like best buddies for a couple of summers there. But anyways, yeah, that is a great question. And there's a number of different ways that I got there. And it was a huge thing that I was thinking about, because on my YouTube channel, as much as I share a lot about my transition, I have always had really strict boundaries up. I've always kind of talked more from a hypothetical perspective and not too personally. And part of that goes back to, Sherry, what you were asking about being a role model. I was very fortunate when I was starting out on YouTube to be surrounded with other people who had been like internet famous for many years and had experienced both the good and the bad sides of it. And so they were sort of able to mentor me before it was even relevant for me, in many ways, of just how to hold yourself with the integrity and the responsibility of being someone with influence, and also the safety concerns, which honestly start so early on. I mean, there are people who will put up, with no subscribers, put up a video on YouTube and it happens to be like found by 4chan and now they're being doxxed. So it takes very little for you to be worried about those safety things. And that's stuff like, you know, don't share the front of your house in pictures or videos, you know, don't share your address. And so those were the same types of things that I kept with me when I was writing the book. Some of my friends are they astonished that I put enough information for people to get my astrology star chart in my book. You can get my full star chart just by reading chapter 1. That to me, that's fine. I was okay going that personal. But yeah, I mean, there was that concern, and there was also the fact that, you know, when you're writing a memoir, you don't exist in a vacuum by yourself. There are other people in your lives. And so I had to be very conscious of details I was sharing about the people that I cared about, or people I didn't care about who were also involved in my story. And, you know, fortunately there was also like a lawyer at the publisher who kind of he was able to double check. I was so concerned about like copyright for some reason, because I'm a YouTuber, when I had like the legal check, but most of what he commented on was like, well, you said this thing about this person. Here's how that could be interpreted, or here's how you're actually revealing something about their medical history or whatever. Have you talked to them about this? What conversations have you had with them? And that was really helpful, to sort of see from a different lens of how you might be revealing details about people in ways that you didn't think, which I think is something we should all think about more as we share things publicly on the internet. But fortunately, you know, as a trans person, it is such an introspective experience, especially before you're out to anyone. There's so much that's happening in your outer life, and, you know, even just your relationships with the people you're closest to, that's kind of the complete opposite in some ways of what's going on inside. And a lot of my book is about what was going on inside. So in those ways, on the privacy side, it was kind of easy to keep things up, but obviously it is hugely personal. There's some details in it that I'm still like, I can't believe I put that in there. But then at the same time, there's other things that I'm like, I don't feel like I went deep enough. You know, I feel like there could have been a lot more emotional vulnerability, or like things that happened in my life that I think maybe would have been important to share, that would have resonated with people. But whether it was because there were other people involved that I would have needed to say, or I just wasn't ready yet in the time to share that, it didn't get in there. But I did, my grandmother finally read the book, and I was like, oh, I wrote about having a pregnancy scare and considering abortion. And like, she is against having children out of wedlock and sex before marriage. And so I'm like, great, really glad my grandma read that now. I'm sure I will hear about that next time I see her. And I think that is also part of it too, is the personal stuff. I am more okay with strangers reading than with certain people in my life that I know, which I think is common for a lot of people. So.
Yeah. Yeah, because you see them regularly and you have to face,
yeah.
And, you know, you have a conversation about it and it becomes very real. So someone else, just to kind of keep this thread with you, Christian wants to know if you are planning to return to YouTube.
Yes. I know I've been working on a very, very big project that should have gone up in May and has become this obsession, and I'm still not done. And I really think I might get it done in August, but I will definitely be putting up another video at least in August. So yeah, I've also been posting this daily podcast lately that turns out is tough to do and takes up a lot of time. It's also hard to return to writing when you spend 8 hours a day making a podcast and doing a bunch of other stuff. But absolutely, and I've been away from YouTube long enough that I'm actually missing it, which is not a super common experience for YouTube creators. I don't think burnout is more common. So breaks are good and everything. Take breaks away from hard work whenever you can.
For sure. Breaks are good. It's good that you're taking that time right now. Dane, question from Bailey for you. How did you decide what to add to your collaborative book?
Ooh, it's really interesting because it almost relates a little bit to what Jackson was talking about regarding personal things. And it's so funny sometimes to look back on what it is in there, and that's like Jackson said, like, oh, I can't believe I wrote that. But like, I'm so glad it's there. Honestly, what I chose was just like or how I chose, I should say, is what was just hot at the time for me. That particular year, 2016, was the year that I did the talk at TEDx, and I had just really kind of exploded into the activism and advocacy, and started getting like a lot more attention from people and attention regarding the fact that I was trans. So I think that that's really what informed a lot of the decisions about my writing. And you can even see, you know, from what I shared this evening, that there are discussions about people and how they interact with me and how they perceive me. And so I think that I was experiencing a lot of that, just having, kind of like Jackson said, like that public, like obvious, everyone knows about it, everyone's like in your business, coming out and having all that commentary and discussion and interest in it, some of which could be very harmful, and some of which led me to, you know, have these thoughts that I would write about it. I think too that a big part of that decision was also like common themes, things that I continue to experience over and over and over again, that I wanted people to know were like not cool things to say to trans people, or like not cool ideas to have about people like myself. And so it was like, you know what, if I just like get up on my soapbox and write about it and like put it on my Instagram and, you know, put it in a play and in a book, like maybe some people will read it and say, oh, like, I'm not going to ask that question next time. So I think that was a big thing too, is just try what would be most impactful to as many people as possible.
That makes sense. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, this is another question for Dave. I was wondering, like, how you kind of like use poetry as a way to like share your experience. Because I feel like that's like, it's interesting that you use poetry rather than like narrative for some parts, and I feel like that kind of like translates to the idea of like sharing your personal experience?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question because up until this project, I didn't consider myself like a poet. I don't know if I still do or if I feel that that way. But for some reason, it just seems to have just flowed for me in that way. And what I like about the poetry is that there's like this like mystique to it that really kind of makes you like really think and really have to like dig into it. And I think because of that, you know, you have to read it over and over again. You read it with like different emphasis in different places and stuff like that. And it like you find different meanings every single time. So there's just something about that that was just so appealing to me because I feel like it really draws the audience or the reader in, and allows them to kind of have that imagination, but also allows me to like express in a way that like I would hope conveys like not only my words and my like thoughts around it, but my feelings. And so I'm really trying to create that picture. So I think that that is why I'm drawn to the poetry. I feel like I said, even though it's not like an identity that I hold, to, you know, to be a poet, I feel like it's actually like some of my most authentic writing is actually the kind of stuff that comes out like this. It's not that carefully crafted prose or essay type writing. It's just like free flow. Oh, this rhymes. Oh, this feels right. This, you know, this image, this symbol, whatever. Yeah, I don't know. I hope that answers your question.
That's awesome. Thanks, Dane.
I love that, Bailey, you just jumped in and asked your question. Kevin, I know you had a question in the chat. Do you want to just go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, I mean, this in large part, this primarily relates to what Jackson mentioned about his grandma, but in terms of the people that you mentioned in the memoir overall, not only how did they react to the book, and more importantly, like your interpretation of them within the memoir?
Yeah, so I think anyone that I mentioned by name, because I changed some names, mostly of like people I'm not in touch with anymore, or who have passed away. But yeah, anyone that I was still in touch with who I mentioned by name, I sent them anywhere they got mentioned when I was kind of in maybe like the second round of edits or so. Actually, I didn't send it all to my mom and dad. I think I was just like, yeah, I kind of say this and this, and like, it's fine, right? It's fine. I just like didn't want them to read it, so I didn't send them everything. But I like sent it to my brother and a couple of my friends. And my brother did actually request that I change one thing. He was like, this is not how I remember this conversation happening. This was not actually how I felt. Like, he misrepresented that. He was like, I guess if it fits for the plot, you can do it, but it's not how it happened. And so I did change that just slightly to address that. And I also had some friends who were like, hey, I don't actually like gendered language about me anymore. Can you make this gender neutral? And that was really cool because I had gone through that same experience shortly before I was coming out. I was like referenced in a book and I wasn't out yet, but I was like, I really think I'm going to come out before this book is published. And so I had to come out to this whole like, it was a team of authors and publishing team and be like, listen, I don't have a new name yet. I'm not even sure on pronouns, but like, you please don't use female pronouns. Yeah, it's such a weird, like, privilege problem to have in transitioning. But yeah, I mean, I think they reacted well. I really try to avoid how people react to it. I'm just like so nervous about negative opinions, especially from people I care about. I mean, they all had very nice things to say about it and said that it was like a good book and stuff, but I didn't really want to have deeper conversations with them. But I will say I did a lot of kind of research and talking to other authors about what do you do about the fact that you're writing about other people. Like I thought when I got started that maybe there were actual rules or laws or something about it, and there's not really. Everyone just kind of has a different opinion. There are definitely people out there who will not check with the people in the book that they're naming, and then the book comes out and those people find out and they're upset about it. And I did not want to do that. I wanted to make sure that everyone was comfortable with how I was representing them. I also found out, again, in that like meeting with the lawyer, that, you know, private citizens, like family members for most of us, you have to be a lot more careful about them than celebrities. Because I mentioned a number of people who are technically in some way public figures, and he was like, oh yeah, you can say anything about them. Like if it's slander, we might have to, you know, be careful, but you can say whatever you want. No, we don't have to like call the manager and check that you're mentioning them. It's no big deal. And that was a surprise to me because I was nervous about that. Yeah, there's so many like weird little things to consider because the publishing world is not journalism. There's not like journalistic integrity. There's not fact checking from the publishers or anything like that. Like you have to do the due diligence on your own. And there's, well, I mean, there are like handbooks that people have published, but there's not like a handbook that someone sends you like, this is how you do it. And so as you are managing all of your very deep emotions that you're bringing to the surface while you're writing it, you have to sort of, you know, be cognizant of the emotions of everyone in your life that is either going to be specifically named or kind of implicitly by proxy implicated by your words.
Wait, so does that mean that anybody can say whatever they want now about you?
I mean, I guess, well, actually, and this is not good, but there is a book that just came out that talks about several trans YouTubers. I checked, at least from what I could find from Google Books, that I am not in it, but several of my friends are. They're all misgendered. It's a book that's, you know, from the camp of people who say that young people shouldn't transition and that it's this trend that's happening. It's very inflammatory. You know that it's from the wrong side of the road because literally there's a blurb from Ben Shapiro, amongst other people who have done, you know, some academics who have done a lot of damaging work for trans people over the years. But it was so heart-wrenching to read. And like, I heard about it because one of my friends just got told from like a viewer, like, hey, did you know that you're in this book? And like, they had no idea that they were in the book. So yeah, it definitely happens. And I think we're going to see more and more of it of happening for, you know, like online celebrities or public figures or whatever. It's, yeah.
Wow. What is Ben Shapiro doing? Like inserting into these conversations?
Apparently blurbing transphobic literature.
Oof. All right. Any last questions before we move towards closing the Q&A and then moving to action brainstorming?
Hi, yeah, I'll jump in. I was related to that, both Jackson and Dane. I'm curious about the responses and reactions and from different generations and age groups. Just curious about, because you mentioned young adult fiction, and I did hear that this is, a growing body of literature. So I'm curious about how your writing has been resonating with different groups, and maybe for people of different generations, including the millennial generation like myself, not having had access to this when we were younger, just whether these older age groups are also talking about how it's resonating with them as well.
Go ahead, Dave, if you want.
I was going to say, who wants to go first? Okay. Well, thanks. It's really, so again, I can almost relate a little bit to what Jackson said about this realization that like, oh, my grandma's going to read it. And then there's like that instant fear that's there as well. I have been, I will say, like very pleasantly surprised by the reception across many generations, particularly in the circumstance when we were performing our show for these faculties at the university. I mean, there were, like in the med school, for example, there were students as well as professors, and some of these doctors are, in their 60s, 70s. A client of mine who is 75, so my personal training client, who is a retired pediatric endocrinologist, who like, I wish I had him around when I was trying to figure out my hormones. But anyway, he was there. And so there's like this huge, broad gap there. And so I found it like, I honestly have to acknowledge that I was perhaps practicing a little bit of ageism, assuming that folks of an older generation like wouldn't care, wouldn't want to come, wouldn't want to learn about it. And I was pleasantly surprised that people were so interested and that it did resonate with them, and that they were willing to like be humble enough to admit that they didn't know, and that they needed to have that learning, and that it really kind of affected them. And I think too that there's this like kind of like sense of self where I see myself as like little old me, and like don't see that my words could be that impactful. So even just like this idea that someone would have like their mind like brains on the wall kind of thing, because they're just so blown away, it's just amazing to me, and also like very affirming, because it's like that's like someone who has had that learning, who has, you know, gone out and will hopefully then kind of impart that to other people that they're in contact with as well. I haven't had like a lot of negative about the writing. My YouTube publication of the TEDx talk actually got so much shit, so much criticism that they asked me if I wanted to take it down. I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, for
yeah,
a while,
yeah.
my TED Talk on TED's YouTube channel was the second most disliked of the thousands on their entire channel. The only one more disliked was a woman of color speaking about terrorism. So like, that says a lot in lots of directions.
Yeah, right. And that's just like, and the reason that like for both of us, like I believe that like the fact that it makes like creates so much discomfort is the reason it needs to be out there, and that, you know, that people need to see it. They came to the decision with mine, like they asked me if I wanted to change the title, if I wanted to hide it, like what we wanted to do, and the decision was made to disable the comments on mine because there was just so much transphobic stuff that was going up there that I was like, you know what, like whatever, I can take it, but like who may be there, who may be reading that, who might be triggered, because it's not just an attack on me, it's an attack on all people who are trans, and that can be so harmful. I choose not to look, but I know that other people may not, you know, make that decision. So there is some negativity that spews out there as well. But to the writing, I will say, like the people who have chosen to like engage in it, you know, YouTube, you can kind of get in your click spiral and you just end up there. But people who have come to see the show and to take in the reading have been, I think, like I said, very humble and very appreciative of the writing. And I'll toss it over to you, Jackson.
Yeah, no, I mean, similar. I think, I mean, thinking kind of generally about reactions to like trans people or like my own transition, I think the one generalization I could make about generations and ages is just the exposure to information, like the level of exposure to information. I don't think I could generalize about the kinds of reactions, because I feel like I have encountered, you know, Gen Z young people who grew up knowing all this kind of thing, and they're still absolute bigots who are going to harass us online or in person. And I've met, you know, folks in their 70s, this is brand new, and they're still ready and, you know, willing to like receive and accept me with open arms. And so I think it's the type of person, that's the type of person you are, and how compassionate you choose to be in your life. But I will say, you know, on the folks who have had less exposure, and whether it's based on age or just, you know, living in a more rural area or whatever the happenstance, I always have a lot more graciousness with them of like, I'm not gonna, they say the wrong words or like don't quite get a concept, like that's fine, so long as we're both, you know, respecting each other and that kind of thing. But as far as like the book goes, I very intentionally wanted it to be an educational resource. There's a whole bunch of educational sidebars throughout the whole book. There's a ton of extra resources at the back. So like this should never be the only book by and about a trans person that someone reading my book reads. I hope it's a starting point for people. So I knew that I was like trying to hit allies, but I also was really very much wanted it to be a source of representation for trans people, especially any like queer trans masculine people out there, because that was a gap in more traditional publishing that I saw. And what slightly surprised me was like when it came out, there were just so many trans people who were like, yeah, it was great, but I bought copies for like my mom and my grandma and my uncle because like they need this. And I feel like those are the people who have gotten a lot more out of it, maybe in some ways, is a lot of the ally people. I like to think, not so much on my YouTube channel, I feel like I'm mostly just like speaking to the choir. It's like trans hangout time. But in a lot of my other work, I am trying to do some of that teaching about allyship. And I like to borrow from the kind of tech community and say that I am targeting the movable middle. So it's not the like early adopters who would be like the trans people or super progressive allies who like, they know everything. And it's not the bigots who you're never going to get on your side, but it's the movable middle. It's the people who are ready and willing to like respect you, and they want to be on your side, but they maybe don't know everything yet. They might not know all the words or exactly why certain things matter and why issues are there. And yeah, turns out I achieved that more so than I thought I would with the book, which was good. That was heartening.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
Should we wrap Q&A? The final question, Veronica, you want to do the honors?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, Sherry, do you want me to ask the final question to our entire group or to just Jackson and Dane?
and Dane.
Okay, yeah, I don't want to leave this question out because I love it so much. But I'm also like, oh, we're like dangerously close to end time. So anyway, the question that I have for both Jackson and Dane, which, sorry if this one's a surprise, I'm not sure if I sent it to you, Dane, but I was hoping for us, like I see there's a lot of common threads in both ending sexism and ending transphobia. I feel like these things like cross over each other. So I'm curious, like, what do you see as like some of the common threads in both of those issues? Maybe it's too big of a question.
I think that like my experience with oppression, because I'm trans, like, well, some of it anyway, has been centered around, I think, those gender norms and roles. You know, the idea of showing up as masculine, showing up as feminine, whatever it is. The expectation for me to be hyper masculine, or even that I put on myself, for example, to be hyper masculine, like cisgender men also experience the expectation to be hypermasculine. You know, women, trans, cis also experience the pressure to be hyper feminine. And I know that within these challenges on sexism, part of the discussion is breaking down those norms and those expectations and that like narrative that you have to be, you know, XYZ, you have to like this drink and do this activity and have this occupation. I mean, it really like permeates everything. And so that is like what I see as like a really big common thread. And my experience with my transition, and again, with like feeling like I need to fulfill these roles, like I'll never forget really early on, something that really rubbed me the wrong way, was that this like younger person that I knew, who was friends with a partner of mine, who like, it was a partner I was with when I started my transition, and we ended up breaking up very shortly after, which is okay, but wasn't going so well. And this friend of hers said, oh, well, you know, if he's a guy, he's got to listen to boy rules now. And that was the first time I was like, what? Like, what does that even mean? Like, what are boy rules? And like, what, are you going to like beat me up? Like, is that what you're trying to say? Like, I was like afraid for my safety, but also like so confused about what was going on. And I didn't like it. And I'm like, I don't want to do this boy rule thing. And that has just really like sat with me so heavily. And so my experience, like before I transitioned, I didn't give a rat's ass about sexism. And this is actually something I talk about in my talk. Like as a woman who is experiencing like misogyny, I actually was just like, whatever, women can vote, like women can get married, what's the big deal? Like, I don't know what feminists want, like what's the problem? You know, like I was one of them, and one of those people. And then only to start to have experiences with masculinity and male privilege, and to realize, wow, like how different, you know, things are. So that experience with my transition made me realize the issues regarding gender norms. And so I think that is where I really weave it together. So when I actually go out to talk about being trans, I try to make it relatable to everybody by talking about gender roles and gender norms and being yourself, whether it is you want to transition or whether it's just want to like express yourself a different way. So I do think that we're really in it together in that regard. Yeah, that's kind of what I've got on that one.
Yeah, I mean, +1 to everything that Dane just said. I mean, and I was also in the same boat. Like I was finally like learning about what feminism actually meant around the same time I was figuring out my gender. And so at the time when I thought that I was just a woman, I was totally like, oh, feminism is stupid. Like, yeah, it's wild. But yeah, no, I think the gender roles, the gender expectations, absolutely. And also like the power dynamics of things. You know, we have men like at the top in society, and a certain type of man too. And if you don't adhere to the same type of man that is in power for whatever reason, then you are less than. And I think this ties in a lot into trans misogyny as well, of how trans women are just sort of hit from all sides. And the reason that we have seen like trans women have been more visible for generations, for, you know, centuries, because they are targeted more. Because they are more in danger, because the idea of them is more salacious and upsetting to the patriarchy than trans men. I mean, we're completely discounted, and I think like those same types of people would not like view us as men at all, because we are also a threat to the idea of what it means to be a man. but in a different way that can kind of be brushed aside sometimes, I think. Like there's just so many parts of how we define gender, how we define sex, and how we define everything that plays out from them that is sort of based on the idea of like, you know, are you a man or are you not? And are you the right type of man or are you not? And so, you know, I think what you were saying there at the end, Dane, is totally true of just like transgender issues are absolutely just an inextricable part of sexism and of feminism. And it's kind of mind-boggling to me when there are people who think that there's no place for trans rights and trans issues within discussions about gender equality, because I mean, to me, it's just all in the same. I mean, I think most things in the world are related to gender equality and to feminism. And yeah, I sort of forgot the last thing I was going to say there, but yeah, Dane, you said it all so well.
I just got to go first.
Yeah. Books. Should we take a moment to talk about where everyone could get your books if they so chose now? Perhaps beyond Amazon. What other bookshops or booksellers would you recommend?
Well, I would definitely recommend bookshop.org, which is maybe available in Canada. I would have to double check on that one. But they give a portion of like proceeds from each book to sort of a big pot for indie booksellers, but also you can shop through a portal of your own favorite indie bookseller. And you're not necessarily buying from them, like if they don't have a copy of my book there, but they get like a larger percentage of the profit. So bookshop.org is a great place to look for my book, or just request it at your library as they reopen.
Awesome.
Nice. So I'm actually just on the website right now for my publisher, and it says buy this on their website. So I think that you can buy it on their website. I thought it was just on Amazon first, and I was like, great, we're gonna help make Jeff Bezos a trillionaire. I think he's gonna get there anyway, but I do think you can get it from breakwaterbooks.com as well. And if you can't find it, you can slide into my DMs and I could go to the store myself and send it to you.
Wow.
But, yeah, that's right.
Commitment.
It's only 5 minutes down the road. St. John's is a small city.
I would love the idea of like boycotting buying trans literature on Amazon to be the thing that brings Jeff Bezos down. That would be amazing.
Yeah, the uprising.
I love it. Actually, Dane, I bought your copy from your publisher's website, but I bought it as an ebook as well. So you can do that.
Sick.
It was initially the
Sick.
file that they sent didn't work, but I asked again, and then someone got back to me within the day, just being like, "Oh, sorry, here it is." So you can
Wow.
get it as an ebook. Mm-hmm.
A+ customer service.
Yeah, it was great.
There you go. In the chat.
Awesome. So while both Jackson and Dane were talking, I also dropped, in the spirit of action, the last bit of every Anti-Sexist Social Club event, we always commit to action brainstorming so that we leave our event with concrete ideas and commitments for what each of us will do to actually further the cause, the topic that we have spent this time together talking about out in the world, in our communities, in our homes, in our families, wherever you want to make a difference. The idea is that we each want to walk away with something tangible that we're going to do. So a few of us, I think, have already dropped stuff in, but we would love to have each of your commitments. We are still figuring out what our reminder mechanism is going to be, and Bailey's amazingly figuring out what that's going to look like. I think we're looking at the reminder tool. Is that right, Bailey? Yeah?
Yeah, I think I was going to set the remind kind of thing where like we can kind of remind people about like future events and like maybe your actions as well. But it kind of more like a group text kind of thing, but we'll just send it to you. So if you sign up, and I can send that like kind of in the recap, I'll put that link to that.
Yeah. So this session was recorded, so we'll do some editing and then, upload it to our YouTube channel. And we will also have an event recap available on the Anti-Sexist Social Club blog. And we'll share it across through Gen Equality and Next Gen Men as well. But yeah, we hope that even if you don't feel comfortable sharing in the chat, that's totally understandable. I hope each of you will jot something down for yourself, and a commitment that you're going to take, or an action that you're going to take. In the meantime, we are super grateful to all of you for taking time on this Thursday. At a time where we've all hit that Zoom wall. We're really grateful to all of you for joining us, especially to Jackson and Dane for taking time out. I know this is super late for Dane, and you have like a 5 a.m. wake up. So super grateful to both of you for taking time to be here with us tonight and to talk about these important topics and to be in community together. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Of course. Thank you for coming.
Thanks everyone for coming. This was wonderful.